Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in, welcome in to Dar's Divine Connections. I'm Dar and I'm here with Dusty Boy and our special guest, Holly Klein. I'm so excited to introduce you to her. She's one of those friends that I get together with, only about once a year, a few times when I'm down here on South Padre Island. But every time we're together, we go deep.
Absolutely.
We talk out of the box and often very spiritual. So I'm happy to have Holly here with me. And let's jump right in and tell us a little bit about yourself, Holly.
Well, actually, it was about 25 years ago when I decided to go back to school. And I finished my bachelor's and master's in social work, and I became a therapist. I worked with individuals and families, and that's how I started my practice in 2000. One of the things you probably want to know, how on earth I got into and asking the question of I need help.
Okay, we're distracted a little bit. We're going to welcome in Mary. The names, this is Holly's first time, and the names are coming up. And welcome in Rita. Rita knows Holly too. Rita upstairs of your room. So
okay.
Yeah. Upstairs on your same floor.
Well, why would God do that is a question that I cannot imagine everyone has not asked that question before. And when my mother passed away in 2005, it changed my life. I started asking for her to let me know she was okay. And so I kept repeating that every night when I went to bed. And finally I intervened with God and said, okay, you've got to send her to me. I know she's having fun, but I really need to know if we're good. And so I was in my office, and no one was there but me, and I was sitting at the front desk of where all the providers would have someone sitting there, and the phone started ringing. The phone would normally not ring, it would go directly into a answering service. And when I picked up the phone, there was this dial tone that just came out of the phone. And so then I put it back down, and it was about 3 feet away from me, and it rang again. And so I reached over again and picked it up and said hello, and no one spoke to me. So I was like, okay. Well, my client came in the door at that time, and we walked back to my office. As we sat down and started talking, these tinkling bells started going off. And it was like nothing I had ever heard in my life. And so I pretended I didn't hear them. And then my client leaned in and said, "Did you hear that?" And then I had to say yes. So I told her it was probably somebody's pager that had been left, but I knew what it was. It had to be from my mother. Then I had another client come in the door to see me, and as we sat down, she handed me a little paper envelope, a little paper bag, and inside it was a little brass and glass angel. Well, I knew then that my mother was really trying to get my attention, so that brought me to tears. But I went home, and that was Saturday. This was Sunday. And I left my purse with my phone in it down in the kitchen. And as I went upstairs to work on the taxes, and my husband called up and said, "I can hear someone speaking in your phone." And my phone had not rung in years. And so I came back down, I checked my phone, and I called AT&T. And I said, "I have a question for you. I want you to take a look at my account because my phone is ringing and it shouldn't be." And the man on the other end said, "Oh yes, we have an order here for your phone to be not forwarded for 24 hours. So I said, "Thank you, put it back on forwarding." And when I hung up the phone with him, I swung my arm out to my mother and I said, okay, I can see that you got in my phone. I know that you cannot do that anymore. I want you to go to your sister. My Aunt Carol lived in Houston at the time. So I called Aunt Carol real quick. I said, I want you to know I have sent her to you. And 3 or 4 days later, Aunt Carol called me back and said, guess what? She started with my phone, and then as I got in bed and I looked at the foot of the bed, there she stood, and we had a conversation about you. And Holly, you know what she did at the end? She came to me and hugged me, and I could feel her. So your loved ones are very talented from the other side. Some of them pick up really quickly and make big connections just like that. Some of them make light connections. Some of them choose to just wait for you there because you're only going to be a moment here on earth. But that gives you kind of an example. And my mother did tell me that she was going to be helping me. She saw what a beautiful soul I was and that she was going to be helping me. And she does help me do the work that I do.
That is an awesome story, Holly. And we have quite a few people that came on. Someone who lost their mother just a few weeks ago, lost a grandson, lost a son. And I think Holly's story is reassuring that they can connect. We just have to find out ways that they want to connect or that they are going to connect with us.
And let me suggest one thing. For those of you that have lost someone, actually they're not lost, they know right where they are, but they have crossed over. There is a book called Life on the Other Side by Sylvia Browne. And I recommend it. In fact, when my mother passed away, I went to the bookstore. They actually had them back then. And I was looking at the books and I said, okay, God, I've got to have a book. And I put my hand on that one and it was very helpful and I've recommended it very often since then. And there's a second book I would recommend too. Embraced by the Light by Betty Eadie is also a good one to give to someone. But I wanted to share that since we had someone that was with us that had something that they'd been going through.
Yes, and I'd like to encourage everyone that now you can ask questions that would apply to everyone. But then we're going to do a part 2 where Holly will look at your specific questions about people you have lost, and Holly will address those. So, oh, you love Sylvia Browne. Yes, Sylvia Browne has passed on, but has a big fan club yet. So I will try to be watching. Oh, you're getting clues and hints. Good. I'll try to be watching the feed, but I invite you to ask questions that have to do with what Holly is talking about now. And then later on, we'll be back for part 2 so that we can answer questions that pertain just specifically to your situation. All right? So I hope I made that clear. So, how were you called to write about this topic? Why would God do that? The happenings with your mother came in to intervene and help you, and then I know you've been doing some writings too.
I've been doing some writing. I was in a major learning mode, and I have a lot of clients that are grief clients, but what happened 18 months ago, I had an 85-year-old new widow who had never lived alone. She'd started out from her home with her parents as a teenager, married her husband, had 5 children in the process, and she found herself a widow. It will be 2 years this spring. So when she came to me, she was having a really difficult time. And as we were working on the grief issues, I asked her to write down some of the things she'd like to know about heaven because her husband is there. And I thought, let's talk about where he is and we can make a picture of what heaven might look like for her. And so she came back with her green stenography book and she had written all these questions down. And so I thought, well, this session, we're just going to answer her questions. And as we started answering her questions, I realized that more people needed these answers, as well as my client sitting in front of me. So that's how we got started with, I call it Heaven's Handbook, and it's in progress. It's about halfway done. It's in progress of being finished. And one of the questions she had was, why would God do that? And what I really wanted her to know is we have to take a look at who we are. And we have to discover, be reminded in our head that we were actually a soul before we got here. And most of us can agree that we have a soul. But that soul had a whole life before we came here. And we had a lot of hand in what we actually did. And in fact, we were going to classes much like we do here. You pick out the classes and the type of work that you want to study. That's very similar to how we do vocational school, or we go to college. We're taking training classes for a specialty. Well, that's what we're doing on the other side before we ever come here. And then when we're there, we're picking out the things that we would like to experience, what we would like to learn, how can we evolve. In fact, most of us will say, well, what's my purpose? And we'll go through life and we'll be asking ourselves that question, what's my purpose? And your purpose is the soul's purpose. And the soul's purpose is to evolve. That's why we're here. And so we pick out a life that will help us evolve as a soul, learn and experience the things that an earth life can bring to us. So that's part of the main reason that we choose to come here is Earth is a real challenge to be in. In fact, we have everything lined up. It's like this big trip that you've planned. You've got your maps. You've got the places you're going to eat. You've got your luggage. And all of a sudden, they squeeze you in this tiny little body. And the moment you make that first cry, we forget everything that we knew about. We knew what our purpose was. So then it's kind of like hide and go seek. Well, now we're seeking. Our whole life we're seeking. And at some point, and sometimes it takes a trauma, at some point it turns on, I'm looking for something. There has to be more. This life doesn't make sense just to have this. And that helps get us to a place where we realize we're on the journey. So it can be quite an exciting thing that we're looking for. But the interesting thing is we are picking out what we're going to do, and we get to pick all the choices we're going to make because God created us out of a little piece of Himself. Now, some of you might say itself or herself, and that's okay. But for ease sake, I'm going to use the word Him. So a little piece of God became our spark, our soul. And we have been given free will and the ability to create. And that's why we're here, and we create our own situation. Life is like a Rubik's Cube. You literally have it like this, and you give it a turn, and all of a sudden, everything's different. How many times have you made a choice in life that you even look back on now and say, well, what if? That was one of the turns of the Rubik's Cube. It doesn't mean you have missed what you need to do. In fact, sometimes it's the very thing that needed to happen to help you reach your destination. Your goals are coming here. So it's never too late in what we do here on the planet.
We had a couple people comment, that they're not sure that this is what they chose. And what's interesting is, I felt that way too. Some of you know I've got a whole list of adversity. But if I look back and look at those things fell into place, and they brought me to where I am today, where I can actually offer a purposeful, passion-driven life program with confidence to help you find your purpose and your passion and your gifts. So I know, I'm just saying, I know where you're at when you say, I don't know if I chose this. And we'll talk about later on what some of the hardest choices people made when they came here. But for now, I love the title, Afterlife Connections Specialist. And here, at Dar's Divine Connections, we love to make connections. So if you'll talk about your very first reading and how this Afterlife Connections Specialist title kind of came to be.
Well, the Afterlife Connection, let me tell you, there are synchronicities in life, but this was such a perfect one. I was taking a class for over a year. I had said, I need to be able to do something more for the clients that come to me with grief. What can I do? What can I do in a regular framework of a mental health therapist? So I was taking a continuing ed class on grief. There were 100 people in the room at least. And as people went around the room and introduced themselves, one of them happened to say, I am so interested in this afterlife piece. I just can't stay out of it. When I heard her say that, I said, I have got to meet her on the break. I walked over to Patty on the break, introduced myself, and she said, I have to show you this book. And the book is called Guided Afterlife Connections, written by a seasoned therapist, 30 years experience. She had come up with a technique that we could actually have the client reach out to their loved one and actually have that last conversation with them. And I knew when I read the book that I had to learn the technique to do that for my clients. I did, and as I did that, it started a spiritual explosion. But I was also able to not only do it myself, but when the time came for another class to be taught, I was invited to come and teach and help her with the new students that were learning this technique. You have to be a seasoned therapist. In fact, I was teaching a psychiatrist we also connected with his dog, but the pets are a little bit later, so hang in there. But that's how I started being a Guided Afterlife Connection Specialist. The book is called that, Guided Afterlife Connections. She now calls it Repair and Reattachment Grief Therapy. So she has reprinted it and put it out as Repair and Reattachment Grief Therapy. But that is how it started. This can happen to any of you as you start getting into this kind of connection with the other side. In fact, they started speaking into my right ear. I'd be sitting there with a client and I'd hear the voice just as clear as if you were speaking to me right there. And as that happened, then I started writing quick letters, quick notes to the client sitting in front of me and give it to him when we would take a break. And from those of you that are familiar with Reiki, as I started doing my Reiki incorporated with what I was doing with my clients in the office, they again started speaking into my right ear, and they would speak loud enough, often enough, saying the same thing. They wanted me to tell the client that was with me what I was seeing and hearing. So you can grow. It is not a case of, oh, that could never be me. No, it actually could be you. So keep growing.
Keep growing and changing. I love how you said it turned out to be like a spiritual revolution. Mm-hmm. It was just burst open. And that's how this whole thing comes to be. That's how all these changes come. And you and I have many deep spiritual conversations. Every time we get together, it's like we go deep. But my question now is, what happens with your clients who really don't believe? And we also had a question from one of our community members here who says, what if they don't get baptized? Do they still go to heaven? So I know you've got a wonderful story about a guy who didn't believe that. I hope you'll share with us.
Absolutely. I call it the Dave story. Um, in the fall of the year, a few years back, he came to see me because he was getting ready to retire. And so we talked about what he needed to do when he did retire, so he didn't sit there on the couch not doing anything. So we came up with a plan. And just before we were finishing up our sessions together, because I felt like we were reaching a conclusion, he reached back and touched his back, and he said, you know, part of right by the side of my back is bothering me. And I said, well, why don't you go to a physician and have him take a look at it and see what he has to say. So we parted company because my part of what I was doing I thought was finished. And it was about the third week of January. And my phone rang, and it was Dave on the phone. He said, Holly, I have cancer. So at that moment, I knew we had to get back together. So Dave came to see me. And what I discovered in talking with him then about other parts of his life, he had had a falling out with the idea of religion and did not believe in God. And apparently it had happened years before. So he had gone his whole life shoving any of that out of the picture. Usually what we can do is take someone's spirituality and help them work through a situation like this, but I knew that I couldn't do that. So what I decided to do was to use Ageless Body, Timeless Mind. You might have heard that title before, by Deepak Chopra. And so I had him reading that, but it's about recognizing the strength inside yourself and using visualization to see things differently. And that was great. In fact, I even used some of the Christopher Reeve books, Still Me, and let's see, Still Me, Nothing is Impossible. And he enjoyed that too, because that too was a strength outside yourself that he could wrap around and believe. So as we moved further in, he was doing that, visualizing his tumor getting smaller. I would go visit him at his home, and we would visit every Wednesday. So I would give a call like on Tuesday or Wednesday morning and say, how about if I come by? And we did that for a little bit. And one day I called him and I said, how about if I come by? And he said, I'm just not feeling really strong today. I said, that's not a problem. I will call you back in a couple of days and see how you're doing. That was Wednesday. On Saturday morning, I was sitting at my computer at home and I opened my emails. And there was an email and said it was from him. I knew that in a hospital bed he wouldn't be using his laptop. So when I opened it up, I realized his wife had sent it to me, and she was telling me he had passed away. So when he passed away, she also had the information on the funeral. At that moment, I thought, I should be writing something. But I knew that I was the therapist and I couldn't write something. But as I sat there and looked at the note, I turned up to the corner of my office and I said, well, Dave, looks like you made it. And in my right ear, he said, yeah, I did. So I knew I wanted to go to the funeral, but I fought with myself for the next 4 or 5 days on whether to write something, and I chose not to. And I get to the funeral home. As I walk in the door, and I'm getting ready to go down the hall to the door where the funeral is going to be, there is a man standing at the door. And I shake his hand, and I said, my name is Holly Klein. And he said, oh, wait. So he motioned to his wife inside the door already. So she comes in, and she said, we've been waiting for you. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, she was Dave's sister. And she said, we visited Dave 2 weeks ago. And he told us you would be speaking at the funeral. So now I'm thinking about all those times during the week where I had gone like this back and forth, back to the computer, not to the computer, and I'm thinking, I probably should have written something. So she goes, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first? I said, how about you go first? So we go into where the funeral is. There's probably 50, 75 people there. They have known him all their life, and I'm sitting in there listening to his sister talk, and I'm thinking, okay, Dave, what do you want me to say? What is it that you want me to say? He said, just tell the story from Wednesday to Saturday. I said, you've got to be kidding. He goes, no, just tell the story. So it's my turn, and I'm up at the dais, and I'm looking out at all these people, and I tell them my name is Holly Klein, and I had the opportunity to meet their friend and person that they loved in the most defining moment of his life. And so then I said, I'm going to tell you a story. So I told them the story of calling him on Wednesday morning and then Saturday morning. And I ended with, and then I turned and I looked to the corner of my office and I said, well, Dave, looks like you made it. And he spoke into my ear. Yes, I did. I said thank you and got off the stage as quickly as possible. I was literally wanting to slip out the side door because I figured these people would think I was absolutely crazy. But they were meeting me and saying thank you for telling the story, because so many people were worried that he wasn't going to make it because he had tossed God out of his life. But you know what? Everybody makes it. There is not a single soul that does not go back to where it came from. God loves us all. This is just a kind of a storyline that we take on here on earth. And some of us choose to be, it's like cops and robbers, the good guy and the bad guy, cowboys and Indians, where we all take on a role. And so Dave made it. And the funny thing was, on the way home, Dave was still talking to me in the car, and I was telling him he needed to go to his party. And Dave said, you're going to be doing a lot of this. And that was in about 2008. I said, I am not. So I was so pleased to make it through 2009 without going to a funeral and speaking. But it didn't occur to me till about 2 years ago that Dave wasn't talking about me speaking at funerals. Dave was talking about me speaking with you all here, and that I was going to be telling you about some of the things that the other side can do and what they want us to know. So I realized that it wasn't funerals, and I'm greatly relieved.
At least she gets to come on here with us instead.
I get to stay with Darlin. I know it's safe.
Can you imagine? That would have just, I don't get speechless often, but if they said to me, we've been waiting for you, and Dave said you were speaking at his funeral, it's like, I think I would have been speechless. I think she did really, really good, everyone. But she just answered your questions as well. And later on, we're going to come back on and you can ask your specific questions. But those of you who are wondering, if it made a difference if they were baptized, if it made a difference if they have a strong faith, she kind of put that question to rest now. She said, everyone.
And something I want to mention about the baptism, I believe it's in 2012 or 13. You can Google this and find it. The Pope had said that there was no more limbo. And I'm a Catholic kid grown up, so I have lots of years of practice as a kid going to school. But limbo was part of the picture when children weren't baptized. They would go there. They wouldn't see God, but it was a nice place. And the Pope said, there's absolutely no more limbo. So if they're not baptized, don't worry, they're all going home. And they'll be there to greet you when you get there.
Yes, that is so beautiful. Dusty's getting antsy because I keep leaning in to read your comments and write them down. So I'll continue to write down comments and questions. But as I mentioned, the general ones will be answered now, and the specifics we'll take care of later. So, Holly, in my 16 signs that the universe wants you to know, I talk about all different signs that you can get from your angels, from the universe, from heaven. But Holly has some, I saw some people enjoying your stories, Holly.
Oh,
immensely. Yes. So I know Holly has some stories about signs, some different signs that some of her clients have gotten. So
I'll even tell you some of mine too. So
okay.
They will send signs electrically. Like my mother went into AT&T and put that little note in for me. So they'll do electrical things. That might be your lights. It might be the television or your phone. Leaving coins. In fact, I had one client who her husband was leaving her dollar bills, butterflies, birds. So, and I'm going to add dreams in here as a way to connect with you. For those of you that have had someone who's a recent passing and you're wondering why you're not having a dream about them or you haven't had one yet, our grief is like a cloud, and it makes it more difficult to get through when we are in a heavy grief mode. So you might find that Aunt Susie gets the dream from whoever it is has passed away, and you're wondering, well, why did she get it and I didn't? There's a grief level that it takes time for you to move forward through before the dream can come in. And when you'll know that it is a visitation and not just a regular garden variety dream, because you'll notice their lips aren't moving like mine are right now. You'll be speaking telepathically back and forth. And what's interesting about that is you will get the exact meaning of what's being said to you. One thing about our earth life is we only have our perception of what someone says. We can really misconstrue what they really mean. But with a dream, you literally get the exact meaning. And that's how it is when we're on the other side too. We get the exact meaning of what someone's saying.
I just want to add, can you speak just a little louder? We have a couple people asking about volume. Okay. You should be able to adjust it on your end, by the way, by going into your settings. But we'll talk a little louder, and hopefully that will help.
I'll tell you a real quick electrical one that you'll really enjoy. I had a client that we were working on something else, but his grandfather happened to pass away, and he came in and he said, my dad's phone rang and it left a message, and it was a message from my grandfather for my dad. And I said that, they can do a lot of things. That's one of the electrical things they can do. They'll leave them. I've heard that they'll leave texts and they'll leave a voicemail. One client left my office, and as she walked out the door of my office, we had been doing a guided afterlife connection, and her hazard lights flashed all the way home for about 20 miles. So they can definitely get into everything.
My story is, my mom had passed, and I was staying up late at night reading, and when I was young, I used to take a flashlight and hide under the covers to read. And then she always seemed to know, and she'd come upstairs and she'd take away the flashlight and tell me I had to get to bed because it was school the next day. But anyway, now she's passed. I am much older, and she has the ability to she found the ability to turn off light switches. So if I'm doing a marathon read 2-3 in the morning, the lights will blow. The first time she blew them out, And then she learned how to shut them off. So, which Charlie really appreciated because he didn't have to climb up on a ladder and replace my bulbs anymore. She was actually flipping the switch. So that's kind of my story. We have quite a few people asking personal questions, and I just want to assure everyone we are coming back on for personal questions. And right now we answered the general question about, does everyone go to heaven? But an interesting thing that came up was, what about murderers? And I know later on we talk about, what about some of those difficult roles that people have chosen? What about them? Do they still go to heaven? And the difficult roles that they've picked.
When I first was starting to study, and Life on the Other Side by Sylvia Browne was one of the books that I first got when my mother passed away. She indicated in her book that there were advanced souls who would take a very difficult life. And two of the lives that she recognized there were those that were homophobic and those that had mental illness. And and I want to tell you, give you another example. In Embraced by the Light, Betty Eadie is having a near-death experience, and she was in the hospital and after surgery, and it didn't go well. And she's in heaven, and her guide shows her a picture window. And in the picture window, there's a homeless man lying on the sidewalk downtown. And in his hand, he has a paper bag with a bottle in it. And he's passed out on the street. There is a man going up to a building wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase. And as he goes up, he looks over to the man on the sidewalk. And Betty Eadie said, why would that man on the sidewalk choose to be him? And he said, let me show you who he is over here. So the next thing she sees on the window is a wise sage being teaching others. And so then she's shown the initial picture again, and she goes, but why would he choose to be him? And the guide said, see the man with the briefcase going up the stairs? He's a philanthropist. And every day that he goes to work, he sees that man and knows that he has to do more. So sometimes the hardest lives are something that are a gift for someone else. And sometimes we may not ever know them, sometimes we do.
Wow, that's a cool story. Thank you. Thank you. Sometimes we know, and sometimes we don't. Cool. We also had someone mention that they get smells. The smell of cigarettes when the loved one is. And I get smells quite often when I'm doing massages or hands-on healing. And I also get, some of them have even seen me get messages that I'll just like hold my ear so that I can talk to their angel team a little clearer, because it's their team, not mine. And so it's kind of funny that we have, once we get together, we start going, yeah, that happened to me. And I see some of you contributing that it happened to you as well, which is really exciting. Let's talk about...
I've got a good little story.
Okay, tell us.
Smells.
Smells.
Worked with a client who was a nurse, and her mother had passed away. And every time she would go into her condo after that, she would smell bacon. She goes, I know that's my mother. So every time she'd walk in her house, she could smell bacon, and she lived by herself. So it was Mom's way of saying, welcome home.
Oh, welcome
I'm not
home.
far away.
And Holly also mentioned just briefly about the grief cloud. So some of you, she had said, if you're not getting dreams or messages right away, sometimes it's because you have such a thick, heavy grief cloud. And I know a couple people have said that they were just devastated by the death. And it would be my guess, I'm not the professional, she is, that your grief cloud is pretty thick. Mm-hmm. And as a seer, I actually do see something that looks like fog. And so the grief cloud is right now, it's just too heavy, and know that it'll lift. Know that it'll lift, and it'll be your perfect timing that it'll lift. I want to just throw in the saying harps and clouds. You know, some people are thinking it's all harps and clouds, and who'd want to go there? Can you talk a little bit about?
Well, as a Catholic kid, it was not interesting to me at all because I was struggling to play piano, and the idea of having to sit there on a cloud playing a harp, I was not interested. I went to Catholic school and Mass every Sunday, and you really just don't hear much about heaven, but that was my idea of what it would be like. And it didn't look like a real exciting place to go as a kid. But when we start learning more about the other side, and I think it starts with recognizing that's where we came from. We came from the other side, and now we're here. And even though we look like we are just a baby, we don't know anything, and we cry whenever we need something, that's a full-grown soul inside that little baby. And we're helping them to grow up. We put them in preschool and move them on forward, and they start making choices. Give me an idea, what direction should we go?
Our peer groups, because I talk to their peer groups all the time. On Fridays.
Okay.
Yeah, let's
this
talk
is like
about peer
homeroom.
groups.
This is like homeroom. Someone told me they didn't have a homeroom, but if you were a kid like me, we would have a homeroom that we started out with, and in the morning, and then we all moved to our different classes, and then we'd be back in homeroom again with the same kids. And we have a homeroom on the other side. We have a peer group that we go to when we get back. So we'll sit and we'll visit with the things that went on in our life, the things that we were successful with, the things that we weren't so successful with, that we'll be doing over again. In fact, you'll probably know, if any of you have ever had a past life regression, you'll see the pattern of your life and how some of them keep showing up. It's because we're really working at learning and having the experience and what we do with it. It's about evolving the soul. We've got to keep focused on that. We are not a human having an experience with a soul in it. No, we're a soul that is having the experience. So that's why we have these outfits. And by the way, these outfits are not meant to last forever. So that's why, some people leave early. They get they have a list, a checkoff list of all the experiences and things they want to experience. We have to have opposites here on the planet. Good, bad, light, dark. They don't know what dark is in heaven because it's all light there. We want to experience what love isn't. And sometimes we get to experience that. They don't know what loss is on the other side. So we experience here. In fact, it's probably one of our most serious experiences that we could ever have. So we are put here to love each other. We're absolutely put here to remember who we really are. And in remembering who you really are, there's a terrific book called Conversations with God, an Uncommon Dialogue, Book 1, by Neil Donald Walsh, who's also a good Catholic kid. It's an incredible book for thinking wider. And if you're on the journey, I highly recommend, if you haven't read it, that is one that you should read.
Great recommendations. And we're going to be posting, just a reminder everyone, we're answering personal questions when we come back on a little later. And we're also going to post like some of the books that she's recommending, some videos, some other resources. I do have a handout that we'll be posting as well. So be assured you've got some information coming. And thank you for all the love and the feedback we've been getting. People are just enjoying your stories as much as I do.
Good. I just
love her stories. So let me give you another lead-in for another story. And one thing she asks people when she's dealing with grief and someone who has just passed away, she's got a question where she says, did anything unusual happen? Won't that be fun to hear some of the answers? Did anything unusual happen?
You know, people, not everyone, but a lot of people have something unusual that's happened. And they don't know what to do with it because it's so unusual or out of the box. They don't share it with anybody because someone might think they're crazy. I had one client who had gone ziplining with their spouse, and they were high in the trees. And when they got to the first level of where they were ziplining to, her husband had a heart attack at the top of the trees. And while there were people there that knew how to do CPR and were working on him, she said, I was sitting back and watching him. And she said, and then I saw his spirit lift right out of his body.
Isn't that something? Wow.
I had another client, and when I asked the question, she leaned in and she said, when I go to the closet in the morning, my shoes and my husband's shoes are moved back and forth. And I said, why do you suppose that is? She said, we were dancers, and my shoes are moved every morning. And I said, he wants you to know that he's still dancing. He is still dancing. I'll have to tell you, when my Aunt Carol died, the one that I sent my mother to after she got my phone, she passed away. In fact, she passed away on my birthday. My family does big things. And so she passed away on my birthday. And we went to her funeral in Houston. And it was a big, big room with huge chandeliers. There were 6 chandeliers in the room. And she was having a country western song. See, I told my family is funny. She had a country western song play during part of the funeral, and I just happened to look up slightly, and the one chandelier above the family was swinging wildly. And so I tapped my husband on the arm to take a look, and my sister saw me tap him. She looked up, and so we're all watching the chandelier swing wildly. So sometimes they will do it right there. I know whenever I've had any kind of a surgery that I needed to go to, or something that was big for me, there would be a flock of birds, and there would be some cardinals in it. So they love you, and they're very aware of what you're doing, what the kids are doing, what your grandkids are doing. So they're right there.
Awesome. And thank you for the reassurance you're giving people who have had a recent death. And let me just remind you that maybe your grief cloud is a little thick right now to get these messages, but just expect them to come. And you can actually ask your guardian angels, your angel team, the universe, to help bring those to you through your grief. And I know that some people think that they like turn their heart off. No, we just have this thick cloud of grief. And sometimes, yeah, we put our armor up, but it is not like a permanent thing. When you're ready to open up, you will be able to open up. So I just want to put out that reassuring comment. So I frequently talk about divine timing. You know, I'll be talking to people and my clients, and I'll say, divine timing is different than human timing. Well, Holly even has some examples of that.
I've got a really good example.
For sure.
There is a difference between the two. And I'm going to say divine timing, there is no such thing as time for them. If you had an example of what a day in heaven is like, what's been written about it is that it's like it's always today, where we have the experience of before, now, and future. I had a young client come to see me in her 20s. Her fiance had suddenly passed away. They both had become ill. He had gone back to the hospital, and he passed away from a blood clot. And it was about 10 days after he had crossed over, she had a dream about him. So she came in and she was telling me about the story of the dream. And she said, he looked at me and he said, "I'm okay." And then he looked around and said, "I think it's been about 8 hours. Well, it was 10 days after he had crossed over. So your loved ones do not have a sense of time like we do over there. So for us, it may feel like, well, gosh, it's been 2 weeks, it's been a month, it's been 2 months. But to them, they don't experience that. But the grief cloud is something that we cannot shorten the grief. We have to experience it. But they want us to move through it. If your loved one could tell you anything, they would want you to keep going because you still have things on your checkoff list. And I promise you, the moment you check off the last one, you don't stay for pie at the end of the day. I'm telling you, you are
done.
out of here. You're done. It's like, it doesn't matter how good the pie is. I am leaving now.
We have some examples on here, and we're really going to have fun reading through those later as to what happened that is unusual. Because as I said, she asked, did anything unusual happen? And so some of our people are sharing those unusual things.
Wonderful.
So we are going to have a wonderful time reading through those.
And don't hesitate to ask your friend or loved one if they've experienced something. They really need to speak that out, and be accepted by what they say.
Yeah, and I know that I didn't tell anybody about the lights except for Charlie because he had to change them. Until Holly and I started talking, and then I told her about the lights. And now I've told all of you, so the word is out, right? So in your writings, you talk about putting on the human bodysuit, and you already talked about some of the hard roles, but could you talk just a little bit more about, our peer group and putting on the human bodysuit, and just talk a little bit more about that?
When we are in our peer group, that's when we are talking with them about what we've done last time, but then we start talking about what you're going to do next. Now, not everyone has to come back for an earth life. You have a choice. There are other places that you can go, but keep in mind that the soul is about evolving. And so that's going to take learning and experience, and it's a eternity piece. There's lots of time for play on the other side too. But what we'll be doing is we'll be learning things, and as you say, well, I think this kind of role for me, maybe it's to be, maybe I really have a love for I think I'd like to end up being a dentist and doing this or that, or start me out as a street urchin and let me work my way through life that way. Then the other peer members, some of them are going to say, well, there's some similarity into some of the things I need to learn. So how about if I blend my need for learning in with yours, and maybe a couple of others might do it too. So you might end up with one of your peer group being your mom. And in another life, you may switch roles, and you may be the dad, and they may be the child. So we have people that we come in contact with, that we start out with. And sometimes there's people like Darla that when we met a number of years ago, there's just something about how we work with each other and talk with each other that it's like I've known you before. And I bet you have experienced that. It could have been the woman in the bookstore. The first sentence out of your mouth and then hers was like you were just continuing a conversation. And we have those moments. And those moments are tied to the spirits around us that we love so much that offer to help us out. I'm going to talk for just a little bit more about the peer group. I haven't talked anything about my life growing up, but it was a real challenge early on. And so I had the opportunity to speak to my group. And I said, why would it be so difficult? And someone answered back, because you might have missed your calling had you not had it the way it was in the beginning. And I realized that's so true. It absolutely was. It made me a much better therapist. The empathy that I have for clients is amazing. The willingness to learn, not having the ego that some folks might have. It just worked well for me after that experience early. Some people have early experiences. Some of them don't have the real challenges until later on, but everyone is going to have them. And some of you think, well, why would I pick that? Keep in mind the soul on the other side looks at the experience as a way to move forward. It's not thinking in this human bodysuit that we pick up when we're in our mother's womb. In fact, that's the first time we feel limitations. We literally, this is my personal thought on it, the first time I was drop kicked and a football game was on, and I was like, what was that? I swear that's probably when my son jumped in at that moment and said, okay, I'm ready to go. And so we all of a sudden have limitations. We come out, we can't go from here to here to here to here. We have to walk, ride our bike, drive a car. Sometimes we get caught in traffic and we miss whatever event that we were supposed to be at. So we have all of these things that come up that we have to make a choice about. Do I go home? Do I stay in the traffic? Do I try and take a back way? But we do this every day. From the moment you wake up, you start making choices. And those are the things that it helped grow us. And some of them are really challenged. Sometimes you have to wait, we wait years before we can reconcile something, before we can look at it and go, you know, that was pretty awful, but I learned some things from it. I learned, and you know, whatever it could be inside yourself, you're more empathetic now. Maybe you have been able to develop better boundaries from people who aren't healthy for you. So we have those experiences. We agree to them when we get here. We just don't happen to know what's on those lists that we're checking off.
I have an example of a peer group, and it's just really close to me, is my grandson. When he was about 4 years old, you know, we were just kind of laying on my bed, just talking about different things, and he said, do you know when I get to be a baby again? And I said, no, honey, I don't really know when that will be, but what makes you ask that? Well, when you were the baby and I was the mommy, and he starts going on and on about this life, and it was so fascinating. But I do want you to know that he just blurted it out. You know, he just said, well, when you were the baby and I was the mommy and we did this together. And it was so interesting. And then later on, he was sitting on my lap, and I had gone to an expo, and I had a reading where the woman drew pictures, and she had like the book of life, and she said, now he's been in your life for multiple chapters. She said about my grandson sitting on my lap. And that just kind of brought his story back, and his question about, you know, when we were switching roles, when he was going to be the baby again, and he didn't realize at age 3 or 4 he was the baby this time, but he's right, the grandbaby. But it was really fun. So I just want to reassure everyone that we are going to go back in. We're going to write down your specific questions and be open for questions in just a couple minutes. But Dusty and I have a final question that I'm sure lots of people want to know the answer to. And that is, what about pets when they pass? What about them?
Oh, those of you that remember Sylvia Brown, you may have seen this too. One day she was on Montel's show. She looked out at the audience and she said, "When I cross over, you all better stand back because my animals are going to mow you down." And that is the truth. Your animals will mow you down. They will be right there to greet you. I had a client that I was working with, and her adult daughter had passed away from cancer. And while they were speaking, I was just taking notes as she would tell me what she was experiencing. All of a sudden she said, "What was that?" And when we were finished, I said, "Please tell me what was that meant." She goes, "An elephant roared, and an elephant bellowed, and a lion roared." And someone said, "Your daughter has all of the animals here." So all of them are going to be there. One client was told by her father on the other side that he had her dog named Hartley. I worked with a woman, we were doing a guided afterlife connection for her cat. Her cat spoke in pictures. Now the dogs that I've done have spoken in words, but the cat would show pictures, and the bed that she was in now was nicer than her owner's bed, and was just showing her pictures, describing. And then she gets to the end and she goes, the woman says, "Oh, it's a plate of shrimp." Or no, lobster, excuse me. It's a plate of lobster. And she started laughing. She goes, it must be for me for dinner. And that was right at the end, and when we were finished, I said, "I have to tell you that lobster wasn't for your dinner. The cat was showing you that's what she has for dinner every night." So they are definitely there. Some of them might even leave, you might hear them clicking their little feet across the floor. Sometimes there's a warm spot on the bed, but if they are not with a loved one, there are a group of guides and angels that watch over our babies. And by the way, when most of mine have gone at the age of 16, so we've had issues, but my Cocker Spaniels have gotten there. When they cross over, they go into this new puppy body. Nothing is wrong with them. They can walk, they can run, they enjoy life on the other side. They actually have on my website is afterlifeconnections.com, and on that there's a story of Easton. And Easton has a tremendous story because he's the first dog that we ever did a guided afterlife connection with. And so he spoke through Dr. Gamel and told us what we should be doing as humans, we could do for pets and animals. So it's a wonderful story that's on my website that you might enjoy reading. And there's other examples of pets in the afterlife too.
Yes, and we'll be posting that website again. And just remember, we will be coming back, but Holly and I could just talk forever and ever.
We could never quit. You would just have to have part 2.
Yes, for sure, for sure. So blessings your way, everyone. We'll be reading through the comments and putting the questions down, and then we will be returning again in a little while. Bye-bye for now. Thank you for coming in.